Newsfirst, face to face with Jamal Ratnayaka.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's edition of Face to Face. Bringing you Face to Face tonight, I'm Jamal Ratnayaka, and tonight with me I have a guest who hails from a very proud political heritage. He is Mayantha Didsanayake, Member of Parliament, Samagi Janapalavega. A very good evening to you, Mr. Didsanayake, and welcome on the show.
Good evening, and thank you so much for having me and giving me this opportunity to address the nation in that sense. I know it's a widely watched program, so once again, my best wishes to the people, and thank you for having me.
Sincerely. So, Mr. Didsanayake, to get the conversation started, let's talk about elections, because 2024 is tipped to be a very interesting year, particularly concerning elections. The President, Ranil Wickremesinghe, has announced that there will be a presidential election, and there have been some very intriguing candidates who have come forth saying that they are willing to take up the helm. But the Samagi Janapalavega, being the main opposition in the country, led by the opposition leader and your candidate for the presidential election, Sajith Premadasa, has been making great strides over the past few months in calling out corruption, in speaking for the people, and so on. So, how are preparations going? I know it is early days, but you need to prepare early. How are preparations going for the election?
It's still early, but we as a party have made a decision to nominate Honorable Sajith Premadasa as our presidential candidate. So we have no issues in any other candidates like the other parties are. Our candidate is very straightforward. It's Sajith Premadasa, who will contest the next presidential election. In case if there's a general election that comes first, if the government loses its majority and they are forced into a general election, again Honorable Sajith Premadasa will be our prime ministerial candidate, or the person who will lead the campaign,
parliamentary team,
parliamentary team. And if you look at our parliamentary team, we have a very, I would like to say, a very good, straightforward, capable, honest, not tainted in any way with corruption, fairly young, experienced people also, who can really take this country and lead this country and make that change that the people of this country, especially the young people of this country, expect. We have that team that can do that.
So, talking about parliamentary elections and gaining a majority in parliament, when it comes to parliamentary elections and so on, one thing that's very synonymous is crossovers within parties. And we saw recently Shan Vijayalal join the SJB, and a couple of days ago we saw Member of Parliament Shaminda Vijayasree resigning from Parliament. Why do you think that happens? Because there has been a debate that has been brewing on that matter as well, saying that there was a sort of a monetary transaction involved. So you know the internal workings and what happened. Brief me a bit and our viewers about it.
Let me first talk about the crossover scenarios. Really, under this system, earlier they did not have crossovers, but since I would say 94, and then in 2000, 2001, we've been having crossovers. The first thing that there was also a Supreme Court verdict against crossovers, especially in 1992, where my father and Lalit signed a motion of impeachment. Although it wasn't a crossover, they signed a motion of impeachment against the sitting President Premadasa. And what happened thereafter is their party membership was suspended and they were sacked from the party. They went to the Supreme Court to say that, look, we are members of parliament who signed a motion of no confidence against the president. But the Supreme Court held that their sacking and subsequently loss of membership is valid, that the party followed the right procedure. And therefore, my father and Lalit and the other 10 members of that group who was identified in leading the motion of impeachment lost their seats in parliament. Subsequently, in 2000, when there was a crossover, a group of MPs who crossed over from the UMP to Chandrika,
government,
the Supreme Court, Saratnanda Silva, gave a ruling saying that, look, any MP who's invited by the president for a national cause can vote according to their conscience. So they have a responsibility for, because they, in that verdict, the the Supreme Court basically said that the president is above party politics.
Right.
So therefore, when there's invitation by the president,
it is valid for MPs to cross over.
Yeah, in the sense to take up responsibilities in the government. However, that verdict also has now recently been changed.
Yes.
So my personal position in terms of crossovers is that it should not take place under this current system, simply because we get a mandate from the people. Because we get preferential votes and we are selected by the people.
Yes.
And there's a certain mandate that's given. So if you, extreme circumstances, for example, like forming of a national government, there are circumstances that crossovers can be viewed.
Yes.
But at the same time, I must also say that those who cross over at the next round find it difficult to come back into parliament.
Right.
Some do, of course, some do. There are exceptions to it, but ultimately the people of the country, your voters, your vote base, where you're from, your districts, they make a decision according to it's a trust factor basically.
Right. Okay.
So my personal thing is that crossovers should not happen. But however, there are extreme circumstances where forming of a national government or
cannot be evaded.
Right. So coming back to the question of elections this year, we are preparing. We are getting our grassroots organizations going. We know that this year is absolutely crucial in terms of changing this political culture and this economic situation in this country.
Right.
And we believe that it is through the SJB and our team and our leader that we can make that difference in this country.
So talking about changing the political culture, one aspect that most politicians have enjoyed over the years is impunity. They have been getting away with corruption for far too long. And the SJB has called out corruption. It has not condoned corruption in any way. But what sort of a mechanism does the SJB have in place to address this matter, this deep-rooted matter?
Very good question. One of the things that I would like to bring about and talk about is also our economic policy, which is a fundamental policy that will guide and how we will do things. It's called the blueprint.
Right.
How we would govern the country in terms of the economy, the national policies, the international policies, how we would govern, how would we will introduce digital technology in terms of as a tool against anti-corruption. So it's a very broad subject, and I think I would at least need an hour to talk about just the economics.
I see.
But basically, the SJB is getting ready to govern in terms of introducing new political culture, as I said.
Yes.
But certainly, digital technology, agriculture, irrigation, farming thing, certainly the anti-corruption aspect of it is something that we, because when you look at the prospective future cabinet of the SJB, Honorable Sajid Premadasa is on record by saying that he is not going to allow anyone who is tainted in any way, even with allegations of corruption, to be in his cabinet. So we want to be absolutely certain that there will be a filtration process within the party, that we will not allow anyone with any allegations,
track record.
Any allegations of corruption to be in high office.
Right.
That's a start. I think we must also look at countries like Singapore and Lee Kuan Yew.
Yes.
Anyone, the cabinet ministers were paid a lot of money, close to $1 million. However, if there's any impunity, if any allegations of any corruption or even abuse of power, they were out of the cabinet the next day, pending a proper investigation process. And justice must prevail.
Right.
Finally, just because you're in high office does not mean that you're shielded from the law.
Yes.
Law is supreme.
Right. So you spoke about abuse of power. And one thing that comes to my mind is the operation carried out by the Sri Lanka police over the past few weeks now. It's almost close to a month. Operation Yuka, cracking down on narcotics and organized crime. What is the SJB's stance on Operation Yuka? Do you condone it? Do you believe that it is being done in a virtuous way, in an honest way?
Well, to begin with, I would think in a government where there isn't a full-time IGP,
Right.
any operation that is conducted can be questioned.
Okay.
So first thing that a government in power must do is to have a full-time
Permanent IGP.
who's accountable, and there is a process of appointing an IGP. The president can't just simply on his whims and fancies appoint an IGP or an acting IGP for the sake of appointing someone. And also the person that is appointed, I'm not finding fault with anyone in that sense personally, but that person cannot, like I said before, can't have any allegations against him of misuse of power, of corruption, especially the rank of the Inspector General of Police is the highest police office in the country.
Yes.
The law enforcement officer of the country, the highest is the IGP. So someone with some kind of allegations, rightly or wrongly, should not be given that position. So I am not going to comment on the Yuktiya operation per se. Any operation that can curb violence and bring in people who are breaking the law and people who are selling drugs to our kids, certainly those operations must take place. But that is the job of the police. As a politician, I do not want to comment immensely on it, but what I can tell you is when our government comes in, we will ensure that someone with high credentials, high responsibility, high accountability will be appointed as the IGP.
Right. So moving from the local arena to the international arena, Sri Lanka's foreign policy seems to have deviated from its non-aligned policy in recent months. We saw earlier this week or late last week how the president announced that a Navy vessel will be deployed to the Red Sea to combat the Houthi rebels, and that is essentially siding with the United States and Israel. And this has certainly soured relations with many countries around the world, especially the Arab nations who have supported Sri Lanka over the years as well. So what will the SJB's foreign policy look like? Because we cannot have a flimsy foreign policy. We need to have a hardline stance. We need to get our priorities straight and move forward with a very robust foreign policy. So talk to me on that as well, Mr. Didsanayake.
Certainly. We recognize the fact that Sri Lanka is right now a bankrupt country. And however, we are in a very strategic location worldwide. And we have, if you look at our history, the 75 years of independence and all that, we have not really utilized our
strategic position.
Strategic
geographical position, yes.
So to begin with, when the SJB comes in, we are looking at foreign trade, we are looking at the non-aligned movement, but however, we believe that we will depend on international players, and we must have a leader and a president, and certainly a foreign minister who realizes how to play in this international arena.
Right.
So as much as it's a balancing act, there are some instances where Sri Lanka will have to make certain decisions. So I think the SJB, when we come in, and at that time, whatever the global realities are, we will have to face it and make decisions accordingly.
Right.
But certainly our support for the Palestinian cause and having a two-state solution is something that we have always stressed and maintained that position in Parliament. We have been very transparent as much as possible in terms of our foreign policy, our economic policy, our agriculture policy, keeping in mind that we are a new party, we are 3 years old, young party with a lot of young politicians and a young leader of the opposition and a leader of the party. So we don't pretend to say that we know it all.
Right.
But at the same time, there are certain basic principles that we have developed which are core values to us. So we will not betray our values. We will ensure that this country's progress is ensured economically, internationally, and of course the local policy as well.
So it was, I think, if my memory serves me right, during the Bandung Convention, it was stated that when there are bilateral ties, it should be a 50-50, where both nations stand to benefit. But because Sri Lanka, one, is bankrupt, and two, deals with major political and major powers in the world, including India, who is our neighbor, China and the US from the far west, we have to be very strategic with our foreign policy, don't we? Because India, being the largest contributor to our economy when we were in times of strife, might tend to exert that pressure on us, asking us to maybe cede authority on some of our national assets. These are not my words, these are the allegations that are being thrown forward by politicians. So how does the SJB plan on addressing all these matters to strengthen bilateral ties, but at the same time ensure that Sri Lanka's territorial integrity is preserved?
I must tell you, I've been a part of this SJB's international team.
Okay.
We have a foreign minister designate, a shadow foreign minister.
Okay.
So we do have a somewhat of a shadow cabinet in terms of looking at issues and policies.
Analysing issues.
But of course, it's led by Honourable Sajid Premadasa himself. And the interactions that we have had as a party with foreign delegates, ambassadors, high commissioners, special VIP guests, foreign guests that comes to this country. Let me just say that I think our international policy and our thinking is in the right direction in terms of dealing with international players. And we must recognize the fact that Sri Lanka is a small country. We have the potential of becoming a very well developed strategic player in the international field. However, we must also recognize the fact that India is our closest trading partner. India is becoming a world superpower, economic superpower. So we must maintain our close ties with India. But at the same time, there are global other players, major players that Sri Lanka is traditionally close to, for example, like Japan, for example. So we must maintain, and Japan is really helping us through this economic crisis. So we must maintain our relationships, develop those relationships and move forward, really move this country towards the 21st century and give the young people of this country, the next leaders of this country, a better deal.
Right. So because you mentioned the young people of this country, I represent that generation, and I myself have witnessed so many of my friends and my colleagues leaving Sri Lanka for what they say are greener pastures. But we know Sri Lanka can be developed, and when or if the SJB is voted into power, what sort of a plan, what sort of a roadmap does the SJB have to bring back all of that lost human capital, the professionals, the young minds who are able and capable of developing Sri Lanka?
Well, when people are leaving right now, because we are in opposition, and I don't want to sugarcoat this, and it will take us some time, at least 4 to 5 years, in terms of getting our economic policy into place and getting Sri Lanka on the road to recovery.
Right.
So we are not saying we come into power tomorrow, day after everything is going to be great, day after that the kids that have left this country can all come back and
they'll be convinced to come back.
Yeah, we have to have a plan in terms of the development and to convince the young people who leave today that with their experience in the next few years that they will gain internationally, so they can come back and play a role in this country's future development. So it's not a magic wand, it's not a magic trick, it's not smoke and mirrors. It's going to be a very hard, long road that we'll have to travel, and we will have to travel that path in terms of having international trade, getting international investment, foreign investment into the country, developing our free trade zones, developing our industries, developing our agriculture. When you look at all those aspects, our fisheries, as you know, the economic zone in Sri Lanka is 8 times greater than the landmass. So so much that we can do in this country, but unfortunately in the last so many years, one of the things that I feel is that we have not had consistent policies and we have not had consistent governments. Each party comes in and tries to undo whatever the other party has done.
There hasn't been a national policy.
There has not been a policy like, for example, in India, they have a policy that's a 10-15 year policy. And I think in the next elections, again, not a prediction, if the BJP comes to power again, again, it will be another in terms of they are furthering their policies of a global economic superpower of India, which Modi has been able to do in the last so many years.
Right. So the SJB is confident of convincing young professionals and young minds to come back to Sri Lanka. But let's talk about the public service in Sri Lanka. It's widely accepted that the public service is bloated and that it requires to be made more efficient and so on. But there is resistance from trade unions when it comes to matters like privatization, which also borders on making the public service more efficient. What is the SJB stance on that matter?
Again, we do believe that the government is bloated. We have about 1.4, 1.5 million
State sector employees.
State sector employees. We believe about 500,000 is enough to run the entire state sector.
Right.
However, you cannot come into power today and say 1 million people are
You
going to
can't lay off the entire set.
It has to have he has to have a consistent plan, an economic plan, a plan how you're going to reduce the government sector if required, how you're going to give employment to young people who wish to join the government and be in the government service.
Yes.
I mean, the good old days, the government service was very honorable.
Sought after.
Yeah, it was not just a pension.
It's the prestige of saying that you work for the state
government. So that has dramatically changed, not just in terms of the how the public look at politicians, but also in terms of how the public look at state employees. So again, we have state enterprises that are bloated and are losing money for the state.
Underperforming.
I for one personally believe, and SJB also believes, that the state enterprises have to be reconstituted and restructured. You have to, like I said, have a balance between restructuring and a balance between how the government operations are run, and of course businesses have to be conducted to make profits.
Right.
I mean, look at your organization, for example, the single largest privately
owned
organization in the country. I think every sector of your company have to be profit driven.
Yes.
So I'm not just saying that the government has to be. There are institutions where, like for example, health, for example, education, for example, housing, for example, sectors where you can't purely look at profits.
Yes.
But at the same time, if you're having state enterprises, one must look at restructuring them and
But it wouldn't be a case of full privatization, maybe going for a public-private partnership.
Partnership, correct. Yes, that's what we have gone on record and said, that we look at our restructuring process, we look at public-private partnerships, we look at maybe even thinking something outside the box. By then there'll be new structures in place, there'll be new policies in place that we can look at. We are open in the sense that we are not rigid by saying, certain political parties do say that, saying that this is our way, this way or the highway.
Yes.
The SJB is a party, like I said, it's a young party, it's a developing party, we have a young team. We would look at what works.
Yes.
We would get the experts in, we'll get the professional expertise to guide us and help us. And we would really make that difference, that change that this country requires.
Right.
I mean, when you look at, when you go overseas, for example, since we are like a third world country and our passports are, ranked like, from the 196 countries, we are like,
below, in the low order.
really below.
Yes.
Don't you, if you traveled 30 years ago or 40 years ago, we have lost something along the way. It's not just the pride, not the national pride. We have lost something that, earlier we were Sri Lankans in that sense. When we traveled to Singapore and in the 70s or in the 80s or even in the 90s for that matter, Singapore was still developing. Look at where they are now and look at what we are. We always compare ourselves with countries like Singapore and countries like Dubai and states like Dubai and other countries like that. But when you look at the resources that are available, the human capital that's available in this country. Another example, we were talking about people going overseas. When our kids go overseas, they do so well. It's amazing.
Yes.
They'll have maybe 3 or 4 years where they, they had really work hard and suffer and, go through the process and learn that country's system. But once they are, once they get their PR or their permanent residency, once they get their citizenship, it's a matter of time for them to really boom and prosper in that country and do well and become champions of industry in that country. Why can't Sri Lankans living in Sri Lanka with the Sri Lankan identity. Do that for ourselves. Why can't we do that for ourselves? Why do we have to go overseas and get that exposure and work for someone else in that country?
Instead of working for the betterment of our own country. I personally believe, because you said that Sri Lanka has lost that spark, especially within the international community, Mr. Didsanayake, is due to the lack of statesmen in the country. We had very influential figures by the names of Lakshman Kadiragama, your father, and even Lalitha Latmudali Gaming Didsanayake, so on. But over the years, the number of statesmen in Sri Lanka, the ones who represent Sri Lanka in the international community, have really become a class that a dying sense of a caliber of people. So I believe that Sri Lanka personally needs to introduce a new brand of statesmen who are the face of Sri Lanka and will represent Sri Lanka in the global community in a very, very positive light. Does the SJB have potential statesmen to represent Sri Lanka in that manner?
Short and quick answer, yes. We have the capability and the potential.
Okay.
I'm not saying we all, as I said earlier, come into government tomorrow and take the ball and just run and perform miracles and wonders.
Yes.
But we are a young team. We are a capable team. We are an honest team. We are a anti-corruption team, led by, in my view, a leader who's again young, thinks outside the box, who's very well read. Something amazing about Honorable Sajid Premdas is that every time I meet him and have a long conversation, which is less and less these days because I'm so involved in the political activities, political process, I learn something new from him.
Right.
So I also surf the net, I read, I watch a lot of documentaries that I would like to see, there are areas that I'm interested in. But this man is so in line with the global thinking and where Sri Lanka should be. He has a vision that, one day when he comes into power, hopefully this year, in God's grace, and Muslims will say inshallah.
If the people decide.
And once the people decide on that. But it is our job as politicians and members of the party to market him, market our policies, and ensure that the people vote for us. Because at the end of the day, what matters is that the people of this country goes to the polling booth with the belief that the SJB can and will make that difference.
Right. The SJB's blueprint is one that will work, but they are very honest in their views, saying that it won't be an overnight success. Trust in the SJB is what my guest tonight, Member of Parliament Mayantha Didsanayake, says. He's representing the Samagi Janapalawege. Thank you very much for joining me this evening, Mr. Didsanayake.
Thank you so much. And
thank you very much. Yes, thank you for the viewers for joining us this evening. Take care and have yourselves a great weekend.